I discovered a GPS tracker hidden beneath my truck while I was performing my usual Saturday morning oil change, a ritual that had been part of my life for more than 40 years. The device was mounted with remarkable precision, professional wiring, no sloppy tape or exposed connectors, and an industrial-strength magnet that clamped it securely to the frame rail. What truly unsettled me was that it was still warm to the touch, not from the faint October sun in Montana, where the temperature lingered around 60 degrees, but from recent power and use. Someone had placed it there only hours earlier, perhaps even that very morning. At 70 years old, retired, living quietly on my modest ranch with little more than horses, a few chickens, and the endless Montana sky, I couldn't fathom why anyone would need to track my movements. My life had become wonderfully predictable after I left the engineering firm. Monday mornings meant feeding the animals at dawn, checking water troughs, and making sure the fence posts hadn't shifted during the night. Tuesdays I drove into town for groceries, always the same route down Highway 89, always stopping at Miller's Market where Betty at the checkout counter knew my order by heart. Wednesdays were for maintenance work around the property, Thursdays for reading the week's newspapers on the porch, and Fridays for preparing the weekend's meals. My calendar hadn't held a surprise in years, and I preferred it that way. The realization settled over me like a cold fog. Someone wanted to know exactly where I went, when I went, and how long I stayed there. The question gnawed at me, refusing to let go. Who benefits from knowing an old man's predictable routine? Who needs real-time updates on trips to the hardware store or the veterinarian's office? Determined to uncover the truth without alerting whoever was responsible, I chose a deliberate, calculated approach. I carefully removed the tracker, wiped away any fingerprints with a paper towel, wrapped it in a Ziploc bag, and mailed it anonymously to an old acquaintance in Winnipeg, Canada. I told no one, not my neighbor Gerald, not the post office clerk who weighed the package, and certainly not my son Vincent. I simply waited, watched, and listened. 12 hours later, my son's phone began ringing incessantly. I watched from the kitchen window as his face drained of color, his shoulders slumping under the weight of whatever was being said on the other end. In that single, unmistakable moment, the puzzle pieces locked together. I knew exactly who had put the tracker on my truck. Before I continue with the rest of what happened, please leave a comment below, telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The Saturday oil change had always been my private ceremony. Every weekend, without fail, I'd slide the creeper under my F-150, drain the old oil, replace the filter, and top everything off with fresh 5W30. The truck itself was a 2008 model, forest green with 187,000 miles on the odometer, and it ran as smoothly as the day I drove it off the lot. I'd replaced the alternator twice, the water pump once, and gone through 3 sets of tires, but the engine itself had never given me trouble. My joints creaked more each year, my back protested louder, but I still enjoyed the work. It was one of the few things in life I could still do entirely on my own terms, a small act of independence in a world that seemed to shrink a little more every day. My late wife Margaret used to bring me coffee while I worked, standing in the garage doorway with steam rising from the mug, asking questions about what I was doing even though she'd heard the answers 100 times before. She'd been gone 3 years now, taken by cancer that spread faster than any of us could process. The garage felt emptier without her presence, the silence heavier. But the ritual remained, my way of maintaining connection to a life that had once felt full and purposeful. That particular morning, as I reached up to tighten the drain plug, my fingers brushed against something foreign, smooth, rectangular, and unmistakably metallic. I paused, heart suddenly beating a little faster, then felt around more carefully. There it was, a black box about the size of a deck of cards, magnetically attached to the frame. I rolled back out, grabbed my flashlight from the toolbox, and slid underneath again. The beam illuminated a tiny red LED blinking steadily in the darkness. Professional installation, high-quality components. This wasn't a cheap toy-grade tracker you could order online for $20. Having spent 4 decades as a mechanical engineer before retiring, I recognized quality equipment immediately. This device was worth $300 or $400, maybe more. And it was still warm from being powered on and transmitting data, not from the engine or the weather. Someone had attached it within the last few hours. Rather than ripping it off in anger, I did what years of troubleshooting had taught me. Document everything first. I took dozens of photographs with my phone, close-ups of the serial number stamped on the side, wide shots showing exactly where it was mounted, even several of the wiring harness. I photographed the LED light, the mounting bracket, the precise angle of installation. Then I wiped the device clean, removed it with a soft click of the magnet, wrapped it carefully, and carried it inside, leaving the oil change half-finished on the driveway. At my kitchen table, I stared at the black box through the clear plastic bag. GPS tracker, no doubt about it. But why? Who would go to such lengths to monitor a 70-year-old man who rarely left his ranch except for groceries, the occasional doctor's visit, or a trip to the feed store? My assets weren't particularly impressive. The ranch was paid off, worth maybe $400,000 in the current market, and I had a modest pension from my engineering career that deposited $2,800 into my checking account on the first of every month. Comfortable, but hardly wealthy. My truck was old, my clothes were functional, and my biggest luxury was the satellite internet connection that let me video chat with my granddaughter Emma once a week. I mentally reviewed the past week, then the past month, looking for anything unusual. Only 3 people had been in my garage: my neighbor Gerald, 75 and still struggling with his flip phone, the propane delivery driver who filled my tank on Monday, and my son Marcus, who had stopped by Tuesday afternoon, supposedly to check on the horses. Gerald couldn't have done it. He barely understood how to send a text message, and I'd known him for 23 years, ever since he and his wife Dorothy moved into the property next door. The delivery guy was a stranger with no motive, a kid in his 20s who spent the entire visit staring at his phone while the propane meter ticked upward. That left Marcus. Harold couldn't have done it. He barely understood how to send a text message. The delivery guy was a stranger with no motive. That left Ethan. He had spent about 15 minutes alone in the garage, claiming he was checking tire pressure to make sure the old man's truck was safe. Yet in 35 years, Ethan had never once shown any interest in the horses, and checking tire pressure doesn't take 15 minutes. My engineer's mind began assembling the puzzle. The warmth of the tracker meant it was actively transmitting. Someone was watching my location in real time. Someone who had the technical skill and the expensive equipment to do it properly. I pulled up Ethan's number on my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I stopped myself. 40 years of solving mechanical problems had taught me one ironclad rule: never draw conclusions without data. Test your hypothesis first. Observe the system under controlled conditions. See what fails when you apply pressure. I opened the drawer in my kitchen desk, dropped the Ziploc bag inside, and closed it. The truck would stay in the garage. I wouldn't drive anywhere for a while. If someone was tracking me, they were about to become very confused about why I had suddenly stopped moving. 3 people had keys to my garage, but only one knew trucks well enough to install a tracker so cleanly: my own son. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. Instead, I waited, just as I had waited for test results in the lab all those years. Sunday passed quietly, feeding the horses, mending fence, cleaning the barn, and enjoying the crisp fall air. I walked the perimeter of my property, checking for anything else out of place. The horses seemed calm. The chickens clucked contentedly in their coop. Everything appeared normal on the surface, yet underneath, I could feel the tension building like a pressure valve about to blow. The F-150 sat untouched. The tracker remained silent in my desk drawer. Monday, I stayed close to the house, repaired a sagging porch railing, organized the tool shed, and made a big pot of chili that would last the week. Still no need to drive. I went through my daily routines with deliberate precision, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while my mind worked through scenarios and possibilities. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Ethan. His voice was too casual, the kind of forced nonchalance people use when they're trying hard to sound normal. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How's everything?" Then, almost immediately, "Your truck running okay?" There it was, not "how are you feeling," but "your truck running okay?" I told him I was having transmission trouble and planned to keep it in the garage for now. His tone shifted instantly, voice tightening. "What's wrong exactly? Where are you taking it? How long will it take?" 3 questions in 5 seconds. That wasn't concern. That was barely controlled panic. I kept my voice calm and said I'd handle it when I got around to it. When I asked why he was suddenly so interested in my truck, silence stretched across the line. Finally, he muttered something about wanting to make sure I was safe at my age. I reminded him I was 70, not dead, and ended the call. He hadn't called to check on me, he'd called to check on the truck. Tuesday morning, while I was pulling weeds in the garden, the phone rang again. Ethan sounded breathless. "Dad, hey, I was thinking maybe I could come visit this weekend." When I mentioned the truck was still broken, he pressed harder. "You're sure it's just the transmission, nothing else wrong with it?" The question was too specific, too pointed. I told him everything was fine and hung up. 2 calls in 3 days. Ethan usually called once a month at most, and both times he had asked about the truck, never about me or the ranch. I opened the desk drawer and looked at the tracker. Its LED still blinked, patient and persistent. My engineer's brain connected more dots. 6 months earlier, Ethan had insisted on setting up my new Wi-Fi router himself. 3 months ago, he had spent an hour alone fixing my slow laptop. This wasn't a single incident. It was a pattern. He hadn't been helping me. He had been preparing for something. The tracker wasn't about my safety. If it were, he wouldn't have panicked when I stayed home. This was about control, knowing exactly where I was at all times. That Tuesday night, I sat in the dark living room and thought about my son, the boy who once stood beside me in this very garage, learning how to change oil and adjust valves, had grown into a man I no longer recognized. I remembered teaching him to drive on these same dirt roads, his nervous hands gripping the wheel too tightly, while I calmly told him to relax, to feel the road through the tires. I remembered watching him graduate high school with honors, walking him through his first apartment lease when he moved to Billings for college, lending him money for his wedding to Lauren 8 years ago. We'd been close once, or at least I thought we had been. But something had changed over the past 2 years. The phone calls became less frequent, his visits shorter and more perfunctory. He'd lost weight, developed dark circles under his eyes, and always seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes like he was waiting for urgent news. Lauren had changed too, more demanding, more materialistic, always talking about houses they couldn't afford and vacations they couldn't take. Last Christmas, when they visited for dinner, Ethan had spent most of the meal scrolling through his phone while Lauren complained about their outdated kitchen and how all her friends were renovating their homes. They'd left early, claiming they had another party to attend. Where had that boy gone? If Ethan was desperate enough to track my movements, there had to be a reason, something that made him willing to lie to his own father. I needed to know how far he would go. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Daniel Thompson, a long-haul trucker and old friend who never asked unnecessary questions. I told him I needed a favor. He agreed without hesitation. 20 minutes later, I met him at the I-90 truck stop just outside Bozeman. The Montana morning was cold, fog clinging to the asphalt. His big rig idled like distant thunder. I handed him a small box containing the tracker, wrapped in bubble wrap and sealed with tape. No return address, no labels. Daniel looked at me for a long moment, his weathered face telling me he understood this wasn't a simple favor. Then he tucked the box behind his seat. "I'll text when I cross the border," he said. His truck pulled away north, red tail lights disappearing into the fog. I watched until they were gone, then drove home. The waiting was the hardest part. I fed the horses, checked the fence line, made myself a sandwich I barely touched, and kept my phone volume turned all the way up. Every minute felt like an hour. My mind kept circling back to worst-case scenarios. What if Ethan was involved with drugs? What if he'd gotten mixed up with organized crime? What if someone was threatening him, forcing him to spy on me? I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that would make sense once we talked it through. But the professional installation of that tracker, the expensive equipment, the careful concealment, none of that suggested innocent intentions. I walked through the house room by room, looking at family photographs on the walls. Vincent at age 5, missing his front teeth, holding up a fish he'd caught in the creek. Vincent at 12, proudly standing next to the go-kart we'd built together in this garage. Vincent at 18, in his graduation cap and gown, his whole future spread out before him like an open road. Margaret stood beside him in that photo, her arm around his shoulders, both of them beaming at the camera. What would she think if she could see us now? Would she understand what I was about to do? Would she forgive me for what might come next? At 8 that evening, Vincent called again, too cheerful, too forced. "Hey, Dad, how's it going? You home?" I confirmed I was, that the truck was still broken. His voice was stretched thin, like wire about to snap. Later, at 9, the phone rang again. "Dad, where are you?" No greeting, just a demand laced with panic. In the background, I heard Jessica's sharp voice. "Give me the phone." Vincent whispered that we needed to talk in person tomorrow morning, that I should stay home tonight. I told him I was 70 years old and had nowhere to go. After I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Vincent hadn't asked if I was okay. He had asked where I was. He was watching his tracking app right now, seeing my truck make an impossible journey 1,500 miles north across the Canadian border. He had lost me, and he was terrified. Good. Let him sweat. That night I couldn't sleep. Something Vincent had said kept echoing. "Are you sure you're at the ranch?" How would he know if I wasn't? The tracker was in Canada. Unless there was another way, he had been watching me. At 1 in the morning, I walked to my office and opened my laptop. Vincent had set up the Wi-Fi 6 months ago and fixed it several times when it ran slow. I opened Task Manager and scanned the running processes. One stood out, a remote access service I didn't recognize. On my phone, I searched the name. My hands began to shake. It was remote desktop software. Someone could view my screen, access my files, and control the computer from anywhere. It had been installed the exact day Vincent helped with the Wi-Fi. Digging deeper into the file access logs, I found bank statements, legal documents, emails, and the property deed, all accessed remotely when I wasn't home. I left the spyware in place so he wouldn't know I had discovered it. Tracker plus spyware, location and finances. Why would my son need both? At 2 a.m., I walked to neighbor Gerald's house and quietly asked to use his computer. He let me in without question, concern etched on his elderly face. I searched the remote access software. Illegal under federal law, up to 10 years in prison. Then I looked up the tracker's model number from my photos. The manufacturer's site described it as an advanced vehicle control system with remote engine shutoff and brake control. I watched videos of test cars at highway speed suddenly losing power, brakes locking, spinning out of control. On a real highway, the driver would almost certainly die. My son hadn't just been tracking me. He had installed a kill switch on my truck. He could end my life with a single button press on his phone. Thursday morning at 6, I made 2 calls, one to Stephen Reynolds, the attorney who handled my late wife's estate, and one to Mike at the auto shop. By noon, I would know whether I was paranoid or whether my son was truly trying to kill me. Stephen's office was in downtown Bozeman, on the 3rd floor of an old brick building that smelled of old wood and leather-bound books. The elevator creaked and groaned as it climbed, a sound that matched how I felt inside, old, tired, struggling upward against gravity and time. I arrived at 9 with a USB drive containing screenshots from Harold's computer and photos of the tracker. Stephen was 62, a sharp-minded lawyer with silver hair and reading glasses that perpetually perched on the end of his nose. He'd handled Sarah's estate with compassion and efficiency, never rushing me through decisions, never making me feel like just another billable hour. I trusted him completely. He plugged in the USB drive, clicked through the files, and his face darkened with each image. "This is surveillance without consent, potentially a felony," he said, his voice low and serious. "Frank, who installed this on your truck?" I couldn't say the words out loud yet. Instead, I told him the rest. I suspected someone had tried to file a power of attorney in my name. Stephen's expression shifted from concern to alarm. He turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed Montana state records. 5 minutes later, he looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, genuine fear. "Frank, sit down." I was already sitting. 2 weeks earlier, someone had submitted a durable power of attorney with a forged signature. The notary had flagged it, but if Stephen hadn't caught it, Ethan would have gained legal control over my ranch, my pension, my medical decisions, everything. 3 days ago, someone had used my ranch as collateral for a $340,000 loan from a shady investment firm. Loan sharks disguised as a legitimate business. Ethan owed them money, and if he didn't pay, they would collect violently. Stephen showed me the paperwork, the forged signature that looked almost like mine, but had telltale differences in the loops and pressure points. Mike at the auto shop confirmed what I feared. The tracker was a full kill switch device, capable of remotely cutting fuel, disabling the engine, and locking the brakes at any speed. "Highway speed, you die," he said flatly. "Seen it before in insurance fraud cases. This here's premeditated." I had 12 days left before the loan sharks came for the ranch, with or without me on it. That night I called retired Detective Tom Patterson, a man I'd known since his rookie days 30 years ago. He confirmed Ethan was drowning in debt from gambling, crypto trading losses, and Jessica's elective surgeries that insurance wouldn't cover. Instead of asking me for help, he had borrowed from dangerous people and used my ranch as collateral. The sharks had already sent someone to photograph the property. I had 2 days left. Friday morning, I drove to Billings and bought 4 hidden blink cameras and a cheap laptop that no one else could ever access. I installed the cameras around the house, living room, kitchen, porch, office, streaming only to the new laptop. Each camera was positioned to capture clear facial recognition and audio. I called the FBI Billings field office and spoke with Agent Carmen Rodriguez. I told her everything: the tracker, the spyware, the forged documents, the loan, the timeline. I arranged for agents to be hidden at my ranch the next morning. I called Ethan and told him to come at 9 a.m., Saturday, just him and me. That night I practiced my questions in the mirror, gentle at first, then firmer until the truth had nowhere left to hide. At 8:55 a.m. Saturday, I heard Ethan's truck on the gravel. I checked the cameras one last time. Agents Rodriguez and Benjamin Harper were already in position, hidden in the barn and tool shed. Ethan knocked 3 times, softly, hesitantly. Jessica stood beside him, uninvited. I opened the door and let them in. They sat on the sofa. I took the chair across from them. I calmly laid out what I knew: the tracker, the spyware, the forged power of attorney, the $340,000 loan. Ethan broke down, admitting he had installed the tracker and accessed my computer, though he claimed he didn't know about the kill switch. Jessica admitted buying the device, insisting it was just GPS. I told them everything had been recorded. Then I called the agents out of hiding. Ethan and Jessica were arrested for wire fraud, attempted murder, elder abuse, and identity theft. They were led away in handcuffs, Ethan sobbing and looking back at me through the car window. 6 months later, Ethan was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, Jessica to 5 years plus a large fine. The FBI raided the loan shark operation, shutting down their entire network and arresting 17 people across 3 states. Agents discovered that the organization had been targeting elderly property owners throughout Montana and Wyoming, using their children and grandchildren as unwitting accomplices by offering them loans with impossible terms, then demanding collateral they knew the borrowers couldn't provide. Ethan had been one of dozens caught in their trap. My ranch was placed in an irrevocable trust, safe from further schemes, with specific instructions that it would pass to my granddaughter Olivia when she turned 25. I adopted a border collie puppy named Scout from the shelter in Billings, and he quickly became my constant companion, following me everywhere around the property, sleeping at the foot of my bed, alert to every sound and movement. Having Scout made the house feel less empty, gave me someone to talk to during the long Montana winters. I joined an elder abuse support group that met twice a month at the community center in town, sharing my story to help others recognize the warning signs. The group was led by a social worker named Catherine, a kind woman in her 50s who had dedicated her career to protecting vulnerable seniors. Through the group, I met others who had experienced similar betrayals. A woman whose daughter had stolen her identity to open credit cards, a man whose son had convinced him to sign over his house while claiming it was just paperwork for insurance, a widow whose nephew had systematically emptied her bank accounts over 2 years. Their stories made me realize I wasn't alone, that this kind of family betrayal was more common than anyone wanted to admit. I still receive letters from Vincent. They arrive every 2 weeks, handwritten on prison stationery, always apologetic, always claiming he's changed. In his latest letter, Vincent said he understands what he did and that turning him in saved his life. I haven't forgiven him yet, but I kept the letter. Some wounds never heal. Looking back, the lessons came too late. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Document everything, photos, screenshots, dates. Protect yourself first. Self-preservation isn't selfish when someone is trying to kill you. Blood may be thicker than water, but survival is thicker than blood. I'm still here, on my ranch, with my dog, living my life on my terms, free. Share this story with your loved ones. It might just save a life. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the real-life stories that truly matter. Your support allows these important messages to reach the people who need them the most. Thank you for listening.